Welcome to Knowing I Am. I'm Matt Milling, and with me is Kim Ward and Allison Dawson. If you came to this podcast through the internet, I want to encourage you to go to our website, knowingiam.org, and click on the Start Here podcast located on the homepage so you may know what this is all about. If you're a listener working through the core lessons, then welcome back and let's get started. This is lesson number 3, the Bible, Why We Can Believe It. This is the third lesson of the core lesson series. In lesson number 2, we pointed out some of the inconsistencies of 3 common arguments disputing God, defined what an ultimate God would have to be, and by the process of elimination narrowed our search. We concluded the only God claiming to be the Creator is the God of the Jews, and confirmed this claim in the very first verse of the Bible. We saw to move forward, we need to determine if we can trust this Bible to be the authority to use to learn more about this God. The goal of this lesson is to examine some unique characteristics of the Bible, making it unique, thus setting it apart from all other manuscripts. We've had the Bible, parts of it, and is it developed over about 5,000-6,000 years, right? And people have tried to disprove it, trying to determine that it's not real, or there's something wrong with it, or it's not the true Word of God. But yet it still stands, and it always stands that test, and we still have it today. And real scholars of the Bible would agree that it's what we have today is a very good, trustworthy source in the original languages and the manuscripts that we have, especially in like King James and other English versions, are good translations. We'll talk about those later on in another lesson, but we're going to look at some things that really stands out about the Bible that makes it so unique. First one, wasn't the Bible just written by different men? What's so special about that?
Well, what's special about it is it's difficult for one person to write an essay and be consistent in their thought and their meaning, their theme, of just for one person to write that. Here we're talking about 66 books written on 3 continents in 3 languages by 40 different people over 1,500 years, and yet the message is consistent. That's the thing about it, that this was not just one person's idea or revelation to one person, but all of these people, and carrying the same thing throughout.
Yeah, so yes, the Bible was written by men, but the Bible also says that the scriptures were given to men under inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So
yes,
the reason why we're pointing this out is like you said, over a long period of time, these people didn't collaborate. One thing to mention is there were all different kinds of people. Some were kings, shepherds, scientists, attorneys, a tax collector, an army general, fisherman. You know, people in the social strata that had really no relationship with each other in many ways.
Yeah.
Right. Their education, the levels of education that they had, all varied. You know, their abilities to communicate, reading and writing, all varied. You know, depending on their social status, their financial status, where they lived, on what continent they were on, in what language they would have communicated. So all of those things. Yeah, absolutely. So all those things varied.
Right. And something you said earlier when we were talking, Ken, is it's one thing if one person writes a whole book or a whole Bible, you get that one person's perspective. Here we got 40 different people that are writing about this at different times and stuff, and it's consistent.
Right,
and
no contradictions.
Right. And so that's one thing we wanted to point out at the very first. So next, what else is unique to the Bible that lends to its credibility? Here we use an acronym, MAPS. The M stands for manuscripts, the A stands for archaeology, P for prophecy, and S for science. So we're going to talk about what's unique in each one of these elements of the Bible. So the first thing, I didn't go to college to study literature, but I do understand that if you go, one of the first things you learn is the importance of manuscripts. And as I understand it, the more manuscripts you have of a work that are consistent, then they can, and especially as they date the writings, they can say, yes, this is actually a genuine work done by so-and-so. In this time. So the number of manuscripts is important. How many manuscripts do you have that support this work? One of them that we have the most manuscripts of ancient work is Homer's Iliad. And it's got 643 manuscripts, and that is the number 2 most supported work that has that many manuscripts. Number 1 is the Bible, and it has 38,000 plus of Old Testament and New Testament manuscripts. Now,
that's interesting to me.
Yeah. And so the word manuscript means handwritten.
Exactly. So we're talking about handwritten copies of these books. Like I said, the Iliad, well-known book. A lot of people read it in school. They only have 643 manuscripts of it, and it was popular enough to still be around. There's 38,000 handwritten copies of the Bible. Something that has to be pretty daggum important for that many to be left. Imagine how many were actually handwritten.
For those that study the manuscripts of the Bible, I understand that there's like 7 differences of all the manuscripts, and all the scholars agree that it's just spelling, doesn't change the meaning.
Yeah.
And if you understand, there were scribes that would copy through time at different periods. They would make copies of scriptures so that they could give them to other people. Many times them scribes will get tired. They've been doing this all day and all night. But to have all these copies and only have 7 differences in spelling, and again, doesn't change the meaning of the manuscripts, that's amazing.
I think it's interesting that when you're talking about those manuscripts that are written in any ancient times, you're not just talking about a 1-letter difference in spelling as well. So that really minimizes the human error aspect of, 1 letter being off, because when they were writing literally in phrases. And so the meaning of the phrase didn't change just because 1 letter was off.
Right.
And I think that's pretty important to point out as well.
And probably just to add to everything we've already said about it, is we are talking about original manuscripts, the Hebrew, the Greek. Some of them also include the Latin, which I think is a little later than the Hebrew and the Greek, but that's specifically what we're talking about. Next to the acronym on the A is going to be archaeology. And again, the last lesson I think we pretty much wore out talking about Darwin and his claim of his theory of evolution. And of course, he had said that even though he knew his theory didn't bear out, he confident after he passed away that the fossil record would actually show that it's true. And I remember Allison saying, just show me. But archaeologists do continue to find things that supports the accuracy of the Bible. One thing that comes to mind, I think recently I heard there was no place that they could find where David and Solomon actually ruled from the same palace or whatever, and over their land, and they actually believe they found that spot now.
Really?
And right. And then another one, I remember they said there was a town in the Bible that said Herod was the king over during the time, and everybody said he didn't go out that far. And then there was a discovery of a coin that had Herod's image on it. And wherever the money is, the king was ruling at that time.
Yeah.
So archaeology continues to support things in the Bible that we didn't know for sure. Anytime a professor's trying to find a place to dig, they do search old manuscripts, old documentation to try to get the right place, because they're trying to find a needle in a haystack. But what's not commonly known, whether it's an archaeologist that believes in God or not, almost all of them use the Bible to try to get them in the right place if they're trying to look for something during that time.
Right. They understand the validity of the text as it was written.
A friend of mine once gave me a VHS, which tells you how old it was. There was this guy that found where the ark was, and I really liked the way he used scientific methods and determined if it was the ark, and I believe he did. Matter of fact, not only did I believe it, but the Turkish government believed it, and they were all excited, and they started making provisions for it to be a tourist attraction. And then somewhere along the line they changed their mind. I guess they figured it wouldn't be a good thing for their country or their theology over there.
I even saw where they had a highway sign that said Noah's Ark with an arrow pointing, because they were getting set up to have tourists.
I don't know why they changed their mind, but
I don't either.
But they just decided not to do it. Another thing I wanted to point out, I saw another one where a lot of people have talked about not knowing where the crossing at the Red Sea was, and if you read in Scripture that there was someone that had put up an altar at that point, had gone back in honor of the Lord, and but this guy again used the Bible and he figured out where it was, and he was just trying to see if he could find where it was, because if he could find it, then you would find artifacts of chariots and horse remains, and that's something that would show that an army got drowned there.
And that came about when we were discussing earlier how letters would get transposed, or how the wrong letter would be written, and there was some question as to whether or not it was the Dead Sea or the Red Sea, and so they were trying to figure out which was the actual location, if any, or was it just this mythological story that had been passed down from generation to generation. So I think it's interesting, that those little typographical errors were what started that whole search.
But what's really more fascinating, he did actually find chariot remains and horse remains.
Wheels and
Yeah.
things like that.
And I like to bring these up, but the point is, even if you have all the evidence out there and you saw and everything's proved, for some people, that's not going to be enough. And
Right.
so I just bring these up because it's fascinating. A lot of the things that are out there where people have found certain things about the Bible that you're not told about.
It's certainly not going to be on your mainstream news. You talked about the VHS that Gary
Yeah.
had. I don't know if you could find that video anywhere. I don't know if it's on the internet anywhere. Or if that VHS would be our only way of seeing that again. I don't,
Well, and you can also search the web for all kinds of stuff, and if you can find it, I mean, there are people out there that got things that aren't true.
Yes.
And you got to be leery of that. There are things out there that appear to be accurate and true, and we know, like you said, you saw where they were even putting up signs, Noah's Ark, and that's how close they got to doing that. So
Yeah.
The next on the acronym of MAPS is prophecy. And I want to stop here just for a moment and say this, to me, is the most compelling argument of something being very unique about the Bible. You know, a lot of different religions got their prophets. Prophet, if he's predicting the future, if he's ever wrong once, he's not a prophet of God. So they can't be wrong. And so what prophecy is where something's foretold and then it comes to pass. We're not talking about Nostradamus, where a lot of the prophecy he does, it really determines what does the person see in that prediction he made, because it's not real clear. We're talking about clear, precise predictions.
and a lot of the quatrains that Nostradamus wrote, they don't present them because they don't know what he means. It's just like, oh, this one, oh, he said something about this. Oh, that sounds kind of like we can fit that in here. But it's not a real order, and a lot of them, they don't have any idea what he meant too.
So these are actual people who got things impressed upon by God, and they wrote it down, and as it turns out to be true. So I thought it'd be interesting. There was a man, I looked online, and there was a professor of mathematics, Peter Stoner.
There's also a YouTube video by this about this guy. What the prophecies were, and the likelihood, the probability of each of those prophecies coming true, and it goes through each little section. It's a pretty quick little video, but it is on YouTube, and it's his mathematical predictions of what the likelihood of those prophecies being fulfilled was.
Well, the one thing I pulled that he did was, what are the odds of one person fulfilling 8 certain messianic prophecies? And I didn't list which ones they were. And this was something he had his class do, and it hasn't been backed up to be accurate, but it's 1 in 10 to the 21st power.
And I think it's pretty important that we note his purpose for trying to see what the what's it even called? Yeah, the probability. His purpose for trying to see what the probability of those prophecies being fulfilled wasn't to prove it, but he set out really to disprove what Christian faith believes. That was really his whole purpose.
Like we had talked about before, the larger that number is, the less of a chance of it to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And probability, when you look at this, it never actually reaches 0. It just gets so close where it's like the closer you get to 0 and not happening, then it's more and more highly unlikely it's going to happen.
Right.
Better chances of getting hit by lightning than it is for one person to fulfill these 8 certain messianic prophecies.
Definitely. Oh yeah, there is a much better chance of winning the lottery than of fulfilling these prophecies.
Actually, Jesus has fulfilled 317 prophecies, many of those beyond his control, like where he was born, what was going to happen while he was hanging on the cross. Those were written about beforehand. There's no way he could say, wait a minute, guys, he could list all 317 and go down the list, done that. How
did he control that he died before they had a chance to break his bones? So he fulfilled the prophecy that his bones will not be broken.
Right. So the odds of these 317 being fulfilled by one person is 1 in the trillion to the 13th power. What we're saying here is we're talking about something that is so big, so huge, that it's not by chance. It had to have been done, foretold by someone that knew.
Yeah, the likelihood of some random people just writing down some stuff and making predictions about someone and nobody knew who it was, and then this one person comes along and I'll be darned, he fulfills every one of those single things that were predicted by different people. Not like he just had a book of Isaiah and said, well, Isaiah said I got to do this, and so I'm going to go over here and make this happen. There was just no way.
There's still some that have not been fulfilled yet. Mm-hmm. But not only the 317 that Christ did, but the Bible itself has already had 668 other prophecies fulfilled to date.
Wow.
Just the fact that we have these books that are written, like we said before, by different people at different times and all different kinds of people in the social class. Not only do they agree, but many of them have written about things in the future consistently that have been correct. I think you used the term in the last lesson, the math is staggering. I don't know that there's enough math to even begin to comprehend how this works.
It's just that I can't remember what the number is, but a statistician has come up with an idea that basically beyond this certain probability, things that are that improbable just never happen. Basically, the probability is zero. So the probability of this is so low that it shouldn't happen. But yet it did.
Next on the acronym is the S, which is for science. We've learned so much more in the sciences now, and we've got so much more knowledge, and we've just learned so much. Probably the biggest thing going on now is the scientific world in many of the different fields of study is beginning to see these elements of intelligent design, that there's something had to design this.
Yes.
We were talking about, obviously, evolution and how improbable it is that everything had to fall into place for this ecosystem to be able to operate. It just doesn't make sense. But
it's called irreducible complexity. That is, you can't, if you go work backwards from an organism the way it is, you reach a certain point to where if these things had to evolve, this thing couldn't be alive. An organism has a certain amount of complexity in order to function. It can't sit around waiting for these things to evolve. Either it's alive or it's not.
So that takes you straight to DNA, which is your foundational chromosomes, one from your father, one from your mother, and then that whole helix that happens there with your DNA. If you were to stretch out one chromosome, it'd be 2 meters long or whatever, however long it is. And you've got 22 of those, 22 per strand.
It's only the vanity of man that makes us think that we can understand how it's created.
So even in astronomy, we see the delicacy of the balance of our universe. The more they're learning about that, you and I were talking about it today. I think we underestimate how complex it is to have all these different forms of life and what it takes for all these to exist in one place. They're finding out that if anything changed in our universe, if any galaxies disappeared or things weren't operating the way they were, it would not allow planet Earth to support life as we know it. And that's fascinating.
Everybody's talking about climate change. It used to be global warming, and they figured out, well, it's not just warming, it's changing. Yeah. The Earth's climate has always changed, but they're all upset about it like we have some power over it. What vanity for us to think we have power over that. But also we're realizing if this little bit of a change can mess with our lives and our ecosystem, imagine what would happen if, the Earth got kicked over 3 degrees and maybe Hawaii would be frozen. Who knows? They see that, and they talk about global warming, climate change, and they realize how fragile it all is, but yet they take for granted that it all happened by accident.
There are a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of arguments from all different sides. And so you can't go into an argument or a debate just saying, this is what I think, this is what somebody told me, this is what I heard, I've always believed this, or whatever. What we're saying is this little acronym here, MAPS, M-A-P-S, is just saying, look at what's out there, both what's written, what science has discovered, look at what archaeologists have discovered, look at the spiritual aspect of it with prophecy, look at the scientific aspect of it, and then make a decision.
And I told y'all I had some new terms, and they'll fit right in here. I heard them from Ravi Zacharias. He said, if someone asks you a question about the Bible, first of all, you have to determine if they're an honest skeptic. In other words, they have questions. They don't believe that the Bible is factual, but they honestly want to know, and they honestly want to have true answers. Then you have a dishonest skeptic who's just trying to bait you, just trying to ask you questions, trying to trip you up, trying to prove, you don't know this, trying to take things out of context. And you can't deal with somebody like that. If you're listening to this lesson, approach it as an honest skeptic. If you don't believe it's true, that's fine. But approach it with an open mind enough to realize when you do hit the truth.
And finally, as we get ready to wind this down, we want to talk about why the discovery of Dead Sea Scrolls is so significant. We just want to take an example here of Isaiah 53. If you were to read that out of your Bible, most people agree that when you read this, that it's clearly talking about the crucifixion of Christ, or at least talking about Christ as a whole. And before the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest manuscript that we had of Isaiah 53 was after the crucifixion of Christ. Obviously, the common argument was, well, this was written afterward. It's so obvious that it was written afterward is because the detail is so close. Allison, I was just going to let you read that second stanza. And
sure.
to show you how it really is pretty obvious it's talking about the crucifixion.
Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we're healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
Right, and so obviously that's talking about the crucifixion,
Yes.
and then they did find some manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls that dated Isaiah 53, what you just read, to be 150 to 200 years BC, which is before the time of the crucifixion. So that's why it's fascinating when you actually look for the truth, the archaeology, like you said, the prophecies fascinate me. Manuscripts are important, and then if you're honest with yourself about the science.
Yeah, and that's
It's
a very
amazing.
detailed description of what you're comparing. Was it already written afterwards? Was it written beforehand? That's very detailed. And I'm more of a global learner. Like, I want to know what the whole issue was. And the truth is, in 200 BC, they weren't using crucifixion yet as a method of the death penalty.
Right.
Wow.
The Bible is obviously unique, and there's some things that are really appear to be impossible about it, that it shouldn't exist, and some of the things that it does, but yet we have it, and it hasn't been disproved. We're going to move on to the next lessons, and the next section is called Why Do We Need Christ? We've read the Bible. I think all of us here could probably say we've read it a few times in its entirety. So what we're going to do as we move forward in the next 3 lessons is basically we're going to give you the cliff notes. We're going to tell you what the plot of the story is and cut to the chase. In lesson number 4, we're going to look at what the problem is, and maybe some of this, as we go through the next 3 lessons, will start to really come into view.
Hey, Ken, we're going to look at what the problem is.
I think we should look at what the problem is.
Hey, Matt, let's
Well,
look at what the problem
I was
is.
looking at the problem.
Who had ears to hear? Let him hear. Who will not hear? Let him hear. Who had ears to hear? Let him hear. Who will not hear?